So, hello and good afternoon again. So, we are back from the coffee break, and apologies for the delay. We should have convened 10 minutes ago. So, we are slightly delayed. This in particular for the colleagues that are online, WebEx, or following the broadcast. So, we are now approaching the end of this multi stakeholder workshop. So session 6, work ahead to 2025. What we felt would be important, and because there was so much interaction throughout the whole workshop yesterday afternoon and today, and there were a number of questions that were not answered, either in the WebEx or also during the sessions here in the plenary. And many of you didn't have the opportunity to raise your questions. You raised your hand, but we had to stop the discussion to either break for coffee or for lunch. So we would propose that we would start with these questions that were not answered. And then we move on to then a discussion, more general discussion on the points as you see in the agenda. So what have we learned so far? What is missing and what needs to improve? But I guess with the response to these unanswered questions, we will probably address these 3 questions. So if we could perhaps have the slides on the screen. We've transferred the questions in the WebEx to the slides that you'll see on the screen. So if we go to the next one, please. So we will go through the questions and we will identify colleagues here in the panel to answer the questions. And if I start with the first one, and I think we've addressed these are with quite a lot of discussions on the critical medicines, critical shortages, crisis. Are there definitions to help understanding and distinguish? Shortages on critical medicines could result in non-critical shortages. So yes, and I think perhaps I will try to again answer this question. Critical medicines, critical shortages, and crisis. So let's start with the crisis. Perhaps that is the simplest way, and this is clearly described in our regulation of EMA's extended mandate. So in a situation of a public health emergency or a major event, the agency or with the MSSG will adopt a list of critical medicines that will be specific for that particular public health emergency or major event. Since we have 2 ongoing public health emergencies, we have currently 2 lists of critical medicines, one for COVID-19 and another one for monkeypox. Now, what is a critical shortage? So a critical shortage is a shortage identified by a national competent authority where there is no alternative medicine in their territory. So that becomes a critical shortage. It does not have to be of a critical medicine or a medicine in the list of critical medicines for a public health emergency. It can be any medicine, and medicine can result in a critical shortage. Now, as a follow-up from the EC Pharma strategy and the work undertaken under the structured dialogue, we will develop a list of critical medicines. So those are medicines that we need to ensure supply for patients at all times. And this will include medicines that are required during peacetime and others that are also required during crisis. So the work has already started under the structured dialogue, and a methodology for establishing a list has been developed, which needs to be further fine-tuned, and then we need to establish the list. So I hope that that has addressed question 1. So I'll move now to question 2. Since we should distinguish the different kinds of medicine shortages and related seriousness, then why the definition of shortage laid by Regulation 123/22 ends with whatever the cause? Darren, can I pass on you this question?
Sure. This is my interpretation, but it's also based on the interpretation of discussing this at the Spock Working Party. So the concept of the Regulation 123 is for crisis and crisis preparedness. So usually in those situations, the whatever the cause is likely to be something that's quite significant. So you're monitoring for these type of issues just in case. For example, if it's a major event, it could be a number of different things. If it's a public health emergency, it's likely to be something that, for example, the monkeypox or the COVID situation, especially in the start. It's to be as broad as possible, but to try and capture as much as possible what could be, particularly for a public health emergency in a major event.
Thank you. So I'll move to the next question on the point about distinguishing.
Vanessa and Joao.
Vanessa, sorry.
Sorry, if I might just to give a little bit of background, it might be useful. So the definition that's currently in the regulation is not the one that was initially in the Commission proposal. And actually that piece, whatever the cause, came through the negotiations with Council and Parliament. And just if somebody is looking for more information, if you go to the recitals of the regulation, there's some further background, sorry, to the reason why that was added. So it clarifies a little bit more in addition to what Darren has already kindly provided.
Thank you. So I think I can move to the next question. On the point about distinguishing the different kind of shortages, we might start with defining some typologies. A manufacturing shortage is different from an availability in the distribution channel. And in some member states, that difference is already recorded under more precise definitions. So here, perhaps I can just explain the work that has been undertaken under the SPOC Working Party, where we've defined, together with the member states, the definition of the different root causes of shortages, so that there is that harmonization on the classification of the root cause of a particular shortage. Now, the work will continue as well under the joint action on shortage that will look into further harmonization of those concepts. Thank you. Can we move to the next slide now? So the pilot on shortages collects information on shortages in case there is no substitution for a critical medicine. Does substitution have to be by another authorized medicine for the condition, or can it be used off-label? Juan, would you be able to address this?
Yes, thank you. And I think it complements a little bit the question or the comment that Francois made before. And yeah, I mean, as far as I'm aware, I don't think so we have ever made a recommendation to use a medicines off-label. So I think it has been rather the opposite. And I think this is the idea. I think recommendations from regulatory authorities will be always in the approved indications. And we will not explore this off-label.
Thank you, Juan. So if we move to the next slide, please. This is in relation to data collection and digitalization. And the question is that we appreciate EMA, AGMA, national competent authorities, and HERA efforts to digitalize the collection of data for shortage prevention and mitigation. Could you share with us the roadmap that will enable the standardization of the data to be submitted and the interoperability of those different data systems? And I will ask perhaps Tony if he wants to have a go.
Well, we're not in a position to share the roadmap right here and now in terms of a graphic to share with the colleagues, but it is obviously a direct intent that we have. I mean, we have a roadmap with regards to the SMP. We're very much building that on the foundational investment that we have in the SPORE system that we've built together as a network in Europe, and that can. And elements of that, we're in active discussion with the HERA colleagues who are also building up their system with regards to the medical countermeasures, and there is a direct instruction between the two pieces of legislation that says to essentially say that there needs to be a sort of mutual consumption between both of those systems as and when they emerge. We're aware, of course, and there's been discussion all throughout this workshop on EMVS with regards to the falsified medicine system, and there are other systems around Europe. And indeed, when we were discussing the sort of challenges with regards to how industry comply with their reporting notifications. They say they have a multi-level sort of challenge. You can even have a multiplicity at the national level, and you also have these emerging requirements at the European level. Some past FMD, some very recent with regards to the extended mandate, and indeed the setup of the HERA. And yet we as a network system want to invest and certainly recycle those foundational elements with regards to the product description, that in common, but by virtue of our different roles, functions and remits, there may be delta data sets that we need to have to fulfill our own role in this discussion. But certainly for the areas of the fields that are overlapping, we can absolutely commit to having sharing sort of those common data fields, at least in the European context, if not the international one, and ensuring interoperability between those systems as and when they're established.
Thank you, Tony. And I think you have addressed already part of the second question there on the screen. And I think the other data, ECDC and Southern Hemisphere infection season data, why don't EMA and HMA use this data to prediction of demand surges? Would you like to address that, Hugo? So yes, indeed, we have a link to the ECDC. Certainly at the level of the MSSG, we have representation from ECDC, and that is described also in the regulation. So the idea is to indeed use data from ECDC, epidemiological data, for prediction to help us with forecast of demand for member states to predict forecast of demand. But I think we had a very long discussion during this workshop on also MAH's efforts in their demand forecast, that likewise they could use information from Southern Hemisphere infection season data as well. So the responsibility there is for both MAHs, and in situations of crisis, then national competent authorities need to do the forecast of demand, and will certainly use information from ECDC. If we can move to the next one, please. And this one is easy because it's for Lorraine, because it's from Lorraine's presentation. Good to see differentiation between generic and innovative products within shortages root cause. Differentiation, unfortunately, disappearing from any following action or guidance. Different product portfolio and medicine characteristics should be better reflected. Do you want to respond, Lorraine?
Especially for me. I'm a little bit unclear as to the question, so I'm going to answer the question I think that the individual is possibly asking me. The analysis on the root cause analysis will be, as I explained, undertaken under the Joint Action Work Package 5, is specifically focusing on that, and it will take into account the differences between products in terms of whether they are generics or still innovated on patent medicines. But just in probably elaborating a little bit more on this, I would come back to the Commission study where, there was a very strong indicator that manufacturing issues do really account for a vast majority of shortages. So again, I think within that we may find an underlying commonality in trends, but there will be differences in relation to the different kinds of products. We know the generics industry, for example, does have a different manufacturing construct and supply chain, heavy use of contracted manufacturing operations, and use in a different way than maybe exists for innovative products. That inevitably will have an impact on supply chain resilience, and what that impact is, it is for the analysis to actually pull out there. We also find with generic medicines, where it may appear that you have a lot of marketing authorizations, there is a dependency on one contract manufacturer that is supplying many of those marketing authorization holders. And again, that circumstances is quite specific to those products. We spoke about reimbursement price, mostly in the context of generic medicines and low pricing, which absolutely is a factor. And I should categorize in this, My agency has no role in pricing, but equally, we often find at the other end for the innovation, the innovative medicines and the entry point into the market, pricing is an issue there because it is simply so high. That too is a barrier. So, I think the analysis will consider similar factors in relation to both type of products, but I think the outcomes and the impacts will be different.
Thank you, Lorraine. And we can move to the next one, please. So thank you for your helpful overview of many initiatives in progress. How will information and outputs from all these efforts be disseminated? Will the HMA EMA task force that is coordinating all efforts share information on a consolidated site? And I will ask Juan to address this question, please.
Thank you very much for this question. And indeed, I think what we have heard is definitely there is a call for improving the way we communicate, and we have expressed that we have a commitment to increase communication and transparency, and this will be done at two levels. On one hand, we will increase the communication of medicines, of shortages, of specific shortages, but we will also increase the communication of activities, what we are doing, what HMA and EMA, the network, is doing in order to manage shortages now and in the future. And we will come with a package proposal to MMSG and to the task force very soon, and we will make that all public. And I think I would say that the best way to monitor what's going on is to follow. There is a specific webpage in the agency which is specifically addressed on shortages, and also there is a specific place in the HMA, and we will try to ensure that the information is made available through these channels.
Thank you very much, Juan. And if we move to the next one. So the ability to make post-approval changes in a timely manner to address manufacturing quality issues is essential. Today, global approvals of a pack can take 5 to 8 years. This delays improvements and contributes to the problem of shortages. How is this topic being addressed within the recommendations in the Good Practice Guide, or possibly even in the EU legislation? And I will ask Darren to try to address that question, please.
Okay, so this one is complex, and it can rely on national flexibilities, but within the good practice guidance, under some of the recommendations, such as the resilience and optimizing the PQ, the pharmaceutical quality system, those aspects in terms of post-approval changes are addressed, and linking into other guidance on those aspects too. I guess this also talks about the global approval of PACs, which can move outside of the EMA from the European Union, should I say, from that side as well. So there's a harmonization with other regulatory frameworks potentially needed as well. Lorraine?
I might just add a little bit to this, and Emer may want to add, because it relates to the work that is been undertaken under the International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Agencies. And I guess building on the pandemic experience, and some of our industry audience may know today that there are pilots planned in this area looking at global collaboration on post-approval change management, and global collaboration on inspections. I think this is a really exciting development in the area of post-approval change management, and I think combining where we have been in the pandemic, what we've learned, plus the output from the pilots, and taking this forward as a global initiative, I think is a very, very exciting development. So the pilots are starting shortly. So we will have a readout for them, I guess, in the early summer. And I can tell you from the regulatory side, there is real willingness to learn from those and see what we can do further to take this forward as an initiative.
Thank you, Lorraine. Excellent. And thank you, Darren, as well. And I believe this was the last question. Next slide, please. Yes, so now we open the floor for questions, first here in the room, and we'll move also then to the WebEx. So all those questions that weren't answered in the previous sessions, now is the time for you to raise your hand and put forward to the panel. Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. Jerry Gogarty, Department of Health, over from London. Just reflecting on the comments at the head of the meeting yesterday on the importance of increasing supply and encouraging new entrants into the market. We also heard yesterday of the widening in the European self-sufficiency gap for plasma to 3.5 million litres a year. So the UK's return to plasma for medicine can make a significant contribution to closing that gap to benefit patients and health systems across the entire European continent. It's the biggest single lever we have today for immunoglobulin supply, a total win-win. So we're really looking forward to collaborating and supporting EMA to help clear the pathway. Additionally, there's the opportunity for every member state and blood service to increase their blood and plasma donor base with donors who reside in the UK.
Maybe just to comment quickly here, because this is, of course, something that's under discussion, particularly within the biologicals working party and the blood working party. I believe there is the opening of the revision of the guideline that would possibly broaden the base for supplies is on the work plan of the BWP. So it's something that will be looked at in the near future. I'm not giving a firm commitment, but there's certainly plans to relook at this.
Great, thank you very much.
More questions? Yes, Mary?
Thank you. I'd like to reference a question that was asked by, I think it was Ange Bradshaw of the Alzheimer's Society, when she talked about communication to vulnerable groups. She mentioned those with mental health problems and with the elderly, but I'd like that vulnerable group to be extended. We learnt, especially in general practice during the COVID pandemic, that there is another group that we need to take notice of. And those are, first, the people with learning disabilities, and secondly, those with multiple pathologies, that is 3 or 4 concurrent diseases, diabetes and psoriasis and cardiovascular disease and whatever else they could add to that. This is a vulnerable lot of people, and increasingly a bigger percentage of our practice population. Within my practice, something like 25% of the people over 60 have 3 or more concurrent diseases. And this is a vulnerable group. We noticed in COVID that they were the ones who died more quickly, were more likely to get the disease, more likely to be admitted into hospital, more likely to be in ITU, which is why we've made substantial efforts to try and vaccinate this group ahead of other groups. I would like these people to be talked of as a vulnerable group, along with the elderly and the paediatric and those with mental health issues. Thank you.
Juan?
Thank you, Mary. And yeah, I mean, we fully agree, and that's something that maybe needs to be factored in every action that we take. I think perhaps this concept goes beyond shortages, it applies to any communication exercise and to any critical situation in which we agree information for these populations is more important than even for the rest, and we acknowledge it's more difficult to reach them than the rest. There are many initiatives, for example, in the context of digital information, many options which are being explored, how we can reach this population better. But yeah, I agree. It is not concretely limited to shortages, it applies to everything, but that's something that needs to be factual. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will now go to the colleagues that are connected via WebEx. And I have Diane Husted from ISP.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Wonderful. I wanted to return to the question earlier raised about reporting on potential versus actual supply disruptions and provide a little bit more industry perspective, because recognizing a potential supply disruption is not always straightforward. Maybe I should start actually and introduce myself. I'm the chair of the ISPE Drug Shortage Initiative, and we're focused on technical quality and regulatory aspects to global drug shortage prevention. And so that's why I wanted to raise the fact that recognizing a potential supply disruption may not always be straightforward. There can be many reasons for a supply interruption and many mitigation opportunities available to manufacturers. Sometimes there are clear impact. When an issue arises, we can recognize very quickly there'll be ramifications to the patient population. But in many other instances, there is less clarity and mitigations available. So some of those mitigation, projects are successful and the patients are not impacted, and quite a number of them are. Sometimes those plans don't work out as intended, and then significant disruptive events ultimately occur. But that early awareness is not really possible because, to manufacturers, they were working toward, a mitigation. So considering how many issues are resolved according to a mitigation plan with no impact to patients, reporting on all of those mitigation, in progress may overwhelm the system or stakeholders with unhelpful information. So I just wanted to put forward perhaps some consideration could be given to having reporting expectations for advance notice by a certain point, or including as soon as possible, because there are some times when it's just not recognized until very late in the situation that there will be impact to patients. And I also think that perhaps we should consider how to share that some situations were unexpected. And sometimes the resolution of situations, certainly to complex manufacturing situations that are often, a part of aseptic manufacturing operations, sometimes there's just not a clear endpoint or knowledge of when a situation may be resolved. So I think maybe to help temper some of the concern is to maybe just bring greater awareness for the fact that sometimes things do happen unexpectedly and that sometimes there isn't a clear timeline available, and that that information not being available 12 months in advance is really not related to an intent to withhold information, but rather to the situation as it evolved. I just wanted to share that perspective. I know there was a lot of question earlier in the session and didn't have a chance to pipe in.
Thank you. And I'll ask Darren to respond.
Thank you, and thanks for the comments. And no doubt it's challenging, but I think when it comes to notification of shortages, we're chronically being underreported. On average, they are notified to us in HPRA at least less than 2 weeks in advance of the shortage. It's also a balance of perfection maybe being the enemy of what's possible. So when we are talking to companies, for those 20% of product cases that were prevented, obviously 100% of them were notified in advance, but actually it was a good bit in advance. And one of the things is they tell us there's a potential shortage, here's what we're doing. But what it does do is it enables some type of an accountability from our side as well to be able to follow up. How are you getting along? Because if it gets to a certain point in time and you're looking at 2 weeks out, it's very, very difficult for alternate suppliers, for health systems, for others to get up to speed to be able to prevent or mitigate in certain instances. So no doubt it's complicated, and there is a lot of good work in industry being done to prevent certain situations, and in most cases people won't know it, but that doesn't mean that you can't report the potential for it to happen and then work collaboratively with us to be able to try and to try and reduce the impact as much as possible. But yes, it's just to reiterate, timely and let us know because it seems to be chronically underreported across the different member states from our experience.
Thank you, Darren. And I'll move back now to the room. So we will alter room and WebEx, and I have Jose.
Thank you. It actually relates a little bit to the presentation that Jorge made this morning. He spoke about the fact that in one of his slides he had a list of shortages, and the vaccine was about 55%. And I was wondering, with COVID vaccines was it COVID vaccine? Was it pediatric vaccines? Because now we're coming up again to a time when we have to decide what COVID medication is going to be prepared. So I think to see a shortage of 55% in those 19 countries seems awfully high. And I wondered where the difference is between pediatric or COVID.
Thank you. George, would you like to answer?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so the vaccines, it means that in 55% of the survey countries, and those countries were 29, we experienced shortages at the community pharmacy level. So we didn't distinguish between COVID vaccination, pediatric vaccination, influenza vaccination, but it's as vaccines as a tool, let's say as a medicine. And in the 29 of the countries, 55% of them experienced shortages over the last 12 months. Yes.
I can confirm certainly that it's not COVID-19 vaccines because they're all included in our list of critical medicines that have been monitored. So those were not COVID vaccine shortages.
I think that's still very worrying to have such a high percentage of really, you know, if it's pediatric medicine, it's essential.
Okay, so I'll move now back to the WebEx and I have Adrian van den Oven, please.
Thank you very much. I appreciated the 2-day meeting. It was very enlightening. The EMA, HMA have issued a lot of guidances to manufacturers on how to notify shortages. There are certain rules being put in place and systems being put in place. So I think that's well on its way. However, what we haven't seen is what is the good practice or the standard operating procedure for the authorities to notify the rest of the industry when a manufacturer notifies a shortage. So what am I meaning by this? Well, we have, for example, detected a shortage of an originator drug, and it's not clear the follow-on producers have enough to match that undersupply. I'm almost certain that the manufacturer has reported it to the authorities because they've also reported it to their investors. So it's unlikely that they didn't report it to authorities. But none of the manufacturers of the follow-ons were informed. So, you know, what is the point of one manufacturer reporting a shortage if you don't inform the alternative manufacturers that they should increase their production or what the shortage is going to look like or something like this? So I think there needs to be a good practice of how you inform the manufacturers, the other manufacturers, when one manufacturer reports a genuine shortage, meaning not a theoretical one, but a real one. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian, and I'll give the floor to Darren to respond.
Thanks, Monica. Thanks, Adrian, for the point. So there is a working guidance within the SPOC network in terms of doing that notification to alternatives without knowing specifics of the particular product. Obviously, I can't provide context, but from at least in our agency, if we take an approach, if we're notified of a shortage and if that MAH can't come up with an alternative solution, whatever that is, and that's the entity that will get first refusal, let's call it that, at coming up with a solution, we definitely contact all other suppliers in the market. And if it's a direct alternative in a generic multi-source market, that's relatively straightforward. If it's not, and it's a bit more complex, we will contact the clinical leads so that those experts in the treatments will be able to tell us if that's not available, this and this is what we would like to use. We will go out and talk to those and do talk to those MAHs in as much as possible. If we're only told about it 2 weeks or less in advance of a shortage, there's not a lot of time that's going to be able to be done for increasing it, but we do go out and try and get it as much as possible. And I know that's the same situation across many of the SPOC colleagues.
Thank you, Darren. And perhaps even to say that in some recent shortages at EMA level, we actually had to go even beyond manufacturers in Europe and looking outside the EU as well. I know that I saw Richard first.
Yes, Richard Bergström, IQVIA. So I think many stakeholders have talked today about the need to make it easier to move packs between countries. And I want to join that choir. And I'll give you an example of how we did that big time, and those were indeed the COVID-19 vaccines. So I was one of the negotiators for the member states, and in fact, and this is probably not that well known, but we moved around first even before delivery, with very short notice, with 1 day's notice before deliveries were going from the companies. We could move hundreds of millions of doses to different places. We reshuffled so much. It's probably around 300 million doses that were sent to a different place than they were planned to go to first. And then in addition, we actually moved between member states already delivered doses, and I guess it's around 30, 40 million doses. How was that possible? English packs and no leaflets. In some countries, we actually provide a leaflet on the side. Locally, the companies provide a leaflet, but for most, there was no leaflet. So I think this is a big example of how you need to build in that mechanism. Of course, it was an extreme situation, but we have some of these shortages that we're talking about here are also extreme. I've heard many patient representatives and physicians testify about how serious the situation is. So we need to take that very seriously, and e-leaflets and English packs should be allowed in many more cases to mitigate shortages. Thank you.
Juan?
Just to complement that, indeed, I mean, the use of electronic product information as well has to be considered in this context, and that's something that in which we are all working.
Despina?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the very interesting discussions these 2 days. And I have been reflecting a little bit more on the questions that are on the screen. And I think that we, personally at least, I have learned a lot from the human sector. And my conclusions are also that we have many in common, especially with regard to communication. And I refer mainly to the afternoon session of today. Indeed, clinical veterinarians have exactly the same issues as the doctors, the clinical doctors. So we need early notification. We need to know more about curation. It's the same issues. A similar thing applies also for the stop of commercialization and withdrawal of products. We see it happening also for the veterinary sector. So I think that it's very important to continue this enhanced communication, let's say, and try to identify what are common aspects that we can work on together and not reinvent the wheel. Of course, we have to adapt for the different sectors in order to meet precisely the needs. But I think it's very important what we do here today, that we discuss all together and we try to find solutions all together. So if we look at the needs and what be improved, I think that maybe what is more important is to continue this dialogue and try to find altogether solutions that work for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Despina. And I think that there was perhaps a nice intervention for us to move to the panel. And I would like to ask my colleagues here in the panel if they would like to address the questions there on the screen from their own perspective. And I will start with Tony.
Thanks very much for that. No, I mean, honestly, colleagues, I found the whole 2 days incredibly interesting, and it's great that we sort of mobilize all of the stakeholders to address this this collective challenge. And even some of the quotations that have come away here in the sense is that, you know, everybody has sort of the combined, everybody wants to get medicines to patients. I haven't heard anybody that says the opposite of that. So, you know, that's the sort of collective challenge that we all have. And the blame game doesn't get us anywhere, you know, and we talk about, you know, isolated pools of responsibility, you know, duties of the producers, etc. But in such a complex environment, it really takes collaboration and exchange amongst all parties. I think transparency has been a massive theme coming out. And I really think that's very, very helpful and will resolve the situation. an awful lot of the confusion, I think, even on discussion on things like critical lists, which can be at the national level, regional level, European level. You know, the extended mandate has one concept of it. The HERA have another concept of it. You know, even we had the example from Charlotte with regards to the French situation. I think a lot of that we can actually tidy up with some very good sort of infographic style information just to explain this rather complicated situation that we all find ourselves in. However, I've also heeded a take-home message for me is that the situation going forward is not likely to improve in and of itself. I mean, it's a challenge that has been essentially there, identified for a number of years now, and will only, you know, become ever more challenging with regards to what might happen to one or more sort of use areas. And that I think that's an important in terms of go forward work plan, both with regards to the HMA task force and also with the agency and its extended mandate, the MSSG, and who knows then what's going to land with regards to the Pharma Review in a matter of weeks. That will absolutely motivate us to try to develop our response and our capability in this area. But certainly in terms of what I've heard here today, it's been really great that we can come together as a collective and try to work out some viable solutions going forward.
All three together, Lorraine.
Well, the problem with following Tony is he's probably said everything that I was going to say. But first of all, I just want to say from my side, I just want to thank everybody that presented and everybody in the audience for what have been excellent contributions. I have to say this has been a really worthwhile 2 days. I have learnt an awful lot from everybody that was involved here, and I have thoroughly enjoyed it. The one thing I would also say is no matter what background any of us are coming from, there is a clear unity in the room and outside of the room for the participants remotely that everybody wants to prevent shortages and everybody wants to get the best outcomes when they actually do occur. And I know I began my presentation yesterday by speaking about the role of the member states and the fact that that's at the core of shortages response. What I've really got a sense from the discussions over the 2 days is the real value that is placed upon the enhanced coordination at European level in both of terms of, you know, medicines availability itself, coordination on shortages, and crisis preparedness and crisis response. And what I have found very I think is the lead under the network strategy for the area of access and availability, what I found incredibly reassuring is the strategic developments that we have earmarked and marked out are right on the money in terms of the change, the advancement and the development that everybody has said is necessary and needed. So I think that is a really good validation of it. The other thing that I would say that I have really learned over today is it's just the acceptance that, you know, every shortage is different, the contributory factors and the circumstances are different, and this is an area where we will never stop learning, and it is always going to be for us as stakeholders about collective evolution. Theme of partnership came out so much, and the interdependencies between all of us, and I think, you know, that is and the willingness has certainly been expressed in there, but I think with partnership comes responsibility, and I do come back to that point of each of us recognizing our responsibilities and working together to achieve that. What's missing, Tony has mentioned the points on transparency. You know, for me, in terms of catalogues, it's never just about the numbers. Something we have really learned acutely over the last number of months. It's just about the information and the context of the shortage to give it meaning and to make it impactful as well. I think in terms of supporting the coordination, there's a clear need for harmonization in terms of how we define shortages and how and what information is necessary and when it's necessary to ensure that shortages can be prevented and mitigated against. Also, I think a really nice point that came across for me in terms of what was maybe a little bit missing, but also what I learned, it's just the acceptance of the challenges that each individual stakeholders need to address and the limitations in what they can provide into the system. And we really do need to understand that. Tony said it's not about finger pointing, but again, it is this acceptance that each of us come to the table bringing gifts, but we also have limitations as well. And finally, I think what needs to be improved, I think the point on media and using media in proactively and positively to support us in our work is a really important thing, and we should never use it as an opportunity to promote a vested interest. So we have to always think of public health and the implications, and of course the patient.
Thank you, Lorraine. And we have Momir online. He's also one of our panelists. So Momir, would you like to make your intervention now?
Yeah, thank you, Monica. And I will actually add what Lorraine and Tony said, so not to repeat. So we all agree that the pharmaceutical supply chain is a very complex system, and for this reason, really dialogue of different stakeholders is so important, and it helps us better understand the function of the global supply chains. So within our session, we discussed different non-legislative actions that could be improved, like to do it more seamlessly, and definitely we need to do additional fine-tuning of the current process. It's really good to see that the shortages is on the agenda of so many different organizations. So I'm sure that in previous years we had this lack of EU-wide agreement on the need for a common approach, but with these 2 days, all these different stakeholders, I think we can come to the summary that the situation will be improved in future, and let's learn from the past experience. And we know that we need to be more proactive, and definitely if we talk about European Health Union, European Health Union cannot exist with the European joint EU solutions, so we have to be focused what is our common approach and how actually we can mitigate all these things that are happening in the market, and of course to mitigate them in an appropriate way. For me, it was also a learning exercise. It's always good that we understand each other better, because we all have our own perspectives, and it's always better to understand what the other stakeholder is thinking, how he's actually trying to resolve the issues. And as said at the beginning, it's a very complex system, and the more the system is complex, the more we need humans to resolve it. So I'm looking forward also to the future collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Momir. And now I give the floor to Darren.
Thanks, Monica. So I'm going to take a positive spin from being one of the last speakers, that everybody has very elegantly said what I already wanted to say. I even have the notes to show that I'm not just making it up. However, just two things that came to my mind that complement. I'm not going to repeat what others have said, but two things that came to my mind. The first one is every stakeholder that spoke and every contributor, when asked, was provided solutions, ideas. That's what we need. As been repeated, it's a complex situation. So the more solutions that come, whether that's education of public and patients, whatever it is, it's the solutions that we need to be looking at in this collaborative environment. The other thing was, even just from my own education, awareness or looking at root cause issues. So for example, one of the sessions yesterday was on immunoglobulins, even just trying to promote awareness of plasma donation as opposed to whole blood donation. Those things help significantly, and it's through these discussions that we're able to really focus on that. So I'll leave it at that.
Juan?
Thank you. I think almost everything has been said. So maybe from a communication point of view, we will just reiterate our commitment to improve, to step up communication efforts and transparency. We have acknowledged the risk of communicating, but I think now we have that behind. I think there is no reason not to do it. And maybe we will focus rather on the risk of how to manage these risks. I just wanted to mention that we had this workshop 5 years ago. And at that time, maybe the perception of the threat of shortages was not as high as it is today. But I think there is more alignment between stakeholders today than there was 5 years ago. So even if there are so many challenges, I think we have progress somehow in this kind of willingness to collaborate and realization that the only way to progress is doing together. Thank you.
Ingvild?
Yes, thank you. I'll just follow up on what Juan said. Nobody is opposed to transparency, but it needs to be balanced and have contextualization, and it needs to be in the right context in the member states. So it's not about the numbers. I would also like to point to a very good improvement since last workshop we had in 2018, and that's the SPOC network. I think the internal communication and cooperation among the member states has improved considerably. And this is the basis for how we communicate, that we have a good interaction and a solid information and exchange, so we can have the right information. So I think that's a huge improvement. If I should look at what needs to be improved or what's missing, I would point to that maybe the member states could be better in interacting with healthcare professional organizations and patient organizations. I think that may be something that needs to be improved. Also, improve the communication on reasons for shortages and what's done to what are the preventing measures and what we do, and to communicate more about what work we're doing. And I would also like to point to follow up Richard Bergström's initiative about electronic package leaflets and multinational packages, because there are countries with small markets, small volumes. It would improve availability of medicines. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I'll move to my co-chair, Hughes.
So, almost the last. Yes, I've learned a lot during this 2 days workshop. I was positively surprised that everybody came with, again, solution. They are solution oriented. There was less and less, because I've had that kind of discussion in my own agency at the national level. I see less and less finger to the others. So I think it's going in the right direction. We need to stay humble, because we all recognize that it's a very complex problems. If it was easy, we would already be fixing it since a very long time. So we need to stay humble, but focused and dedicated to tackle this issue. And I will use a citation for Alexander the Great. He said that behind the conduct of each depends the fate of all. And I believe it's a very good citation to put things into perspective. We need to keep fighting for it. It's not a quick victory, for sure, but we need to mobilize every single person here and outside, need to contribute to this, to tackle this issue. So thank you very much for your insightful discussion and inputs.
Thank you. Then I guess now is my turn. And yes, certainly I have almost nothing left in my speech to share with you after all this very good interventions. But I think something I presented in relation to the work of the EMA task force and the fact that it's going to be used as a hub for coordination of all these initiatives that are ongoing. And I think this is the right time. So there are a number of initiatives ongoing at the moment in the area of shortage and availability. So there is a momentum. We have high public attention, and we discussed that. And also there is a political will. So we need to capitalize on all these initiatives for the benefit of patients. Also, we have an opportunity, unique opportunity to shape our future, building on the experience in the recent times and making use of the structures that we have in place, being formalized through the EMA's extended mandate. And last but not least, also the new pharmaceutical legislation. So a unique opportunity for us to really make a difference, but we all need to work together. We've worked together on many different initiatives, so we need more of these multi-stakeholder workshops. We need more initiatives to be together and to listen to all stakeholders around the table. That's how we can make a difference, is by listening to everyone and having contributions from all stakeholders in the supply chain. So that has not changed from the multi-stakeholder workshop that took place in 2018. Now, before I finish, I want to thank all the speakers, all the moderators, all the rapporteurs, And of course, last but not least, the EMA staff that help with the organization of this workshop. And these are not the final words because my executive director at the left will be tasked to do so. But I want to take the opportunity to thank all those involved in the preparation of this multi-stakeholder workshop. Of course, a lot of work that was ongoing in the background. And in particular, I would like to thank Ivana Zenya, also supported by Pia in the organization, and of course, Juan. For all the work. So now the last word is for our executive director.
Thank you very much, Monica. And I don't think I need to add my thanks, but they are most sincere, really, to all the chairs, moderators, Monica and Hugh themselves, because I think, you know, this would not have happened without your collective effort. And my big takeaway is that a lot has been done. We have much better tools now than we had even 3 years ago. There's a very constructive and positive collaborative thinking going on, which is because all stakeholders are engaged and working together. And this is an example of an area where we will only solve it if we do work together. So for me, it's an example of the power of collective and collaborative thinking, action, communication, and hard work to make sure that actually what we do matters and then is passed on to the patients of Europe. So a big thank you for the part that you've had in getting the ideas and solutions together. We will compile all this in a report that will be published within the next 6 weeks or so. It'll be on our website. We'll also share all the presentations that have been presented during this workshop. A big thank you also to the people on WebEx who've been listening into this, because it's been such a rich debate that I'm sure you were very sorry not to be in the room. So with that, I would wish you all Godspeed and safe travels for those of you who will travel, and for those of you who are retiring back to their desks or back to their dinner. Have a great evening. Thank you.